And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. I'm excited to be joined by James Muir today. James is the founder and CEO of Best Practice International and is best-selling author of the #1 book on closing sales, The Perfect Close. James, a warm welcome. Excited for this one, dude. How are you doing?
I'm excited. Thanks for having me on.
No worries, man. So we're going to be talking all about the secret to closing deals. We're going to be talking a bit about your book. And we're going to be helping everyone tuning in, business owners, salespeople, essentially how they can get more deals over the line. I'm going to put you on the spot, though, James, straight away. Is there really a secret to closing deals and a formula to doing it consistently?
Honestly, the only thing that really makes it a secret is that the common methods that people use for closing for the last, 50 years or whatever that are all so dysfunctional and so bad that people actually end up doing nothing. Actually, 50 to 90% of all sales encounters actually end without any closing or any commitment being asked for whatsoever. 50 to 90%. And that is just a mind-boggling statistic to me. So if there's a secret, it's, and if you ask me why that is, by the way, I would just tell you that because we go out and someone will Google what a good close and they listen to that close and think, I could never say that. That is totally manipulative. And since 99% of these little tactics that are taught out there are manipulative, people just don't do anything. Right? Rather than to damage the relationship with the client, they just don't do anything. And so if there's a secret, it's just that the common myth or knowledge about what closing is really very flawed. And it's not hard at all, actually. It's very simple. And so in that sense, I guess it's a secret, but if you just, get off of yourself and stop leaning into it so hard, you'll realize that it's a lot easier than you think.
That's a heck of a high stat. I didn't realize that percentage was so high. So 50 to 99% people don't even ask for the sale. So they've had a conversation with their prospect.
It varies. Yeah, it varies a little bit by industry, but in some industries as high as 90% where a meeting will happen, but nobody's asking for commitment on either side.
Madness. Okay. So I want to jump straight into this. I mean, before perhaps we lead up to it, maybe we should talk about on your side of things, because on this show we've covered many different angles of the sales process, whether that's cold calling, whether that's generating inbound opportunities, whether that's discovery calls, presentations, and of course now we're leaning towards the end of that sales cycle and asking for the business. How, in your opinion, James, how much weight is there on actually asking for the business itself?
Well, it is very important because if you can go through all the rest of the process, but you can't get it over the finish line, you won't, you actually get a sale at all. And so it's arguably the most important step. But let me frame that a little bit, because I had a client ask me this. They said, hey, what is the single best thing I can do to improve sales? And you would think, as an author of a best-selling book on closing, my answer would be closing. But the truth is, it's not that. The single best thing that any business can do to improve sales is to sell to only ideal clients, right? And the reason for that is that that's at the top of the funnel. And so if I put in garbage at the top, it doesn't even matter. You could execute the rest of your process completely flawlessly, but if you're selling to the wrong person who actually can't buy it, it'll all fall on deaf ears. So with that little caveat, and I know this session is not about targeting, but really that is the single most effective. That's what the data shows. If you only sell to ideal clients, you'll improve everything else in your sales process.
Hey, I appreciate the honesty. And that is the ideal situation, right? To be selling only to your ideal customers. Unfortunately, I know I've seen the front end of it that it doesn't always work out that way with how things go, but certainly that's what we want to be gearing towards. So let's jump into it. I mean, James, tell us a bit more about what the perfect close is and what it really involves and how we can put it into action.
Sure. Well, so for anybody that's nervous, right? And most of the people, when they hear the title, The Perfect Close, which is maybe not the best title to have chosen, is they think it's some kind of manipulative, phrase or thing that you're going to say that's going to, automatically persuade people to buy, but it's really not that. And so it's really just two questions. It's zero pressure, and it's 95% effective. And so when people hear that last part, it sounds too good to be true. But let me just give you a little data on that. There is a company out there called Gong.io. And what they are is they're a call analytics company. They analyze call centers and calls. And they actually asked this question. They said, what is the single best closing approach that there is? And they analyzed over 1 million calls, and they determined that the perfect close, which is the one we're going to share with your audience right now, is hands down the best closing approach that there is, and that the top performers are actually using it about 3 times per hour, which should tell you that it doesn't get old the more you use it. So, and to contrast that with I have every book on closing you can think of, and they all have names and they all have special setups, and sometimes, and most of them are very manipulative, and you have to know the exact right time. And the perfect close isn't like that. You don't have to know the right timing of it. You don't have to. It's so facilitative and open that it leaves you and the customer on much emotionally much higher ground. And so that's one of the things that makes it perfect. I didn't call it perfect, by the way. One of my students called it that. So, but if we want to jump into it, there's just 2 questions. There's actually 5 variations, but we'll share at least the basic variation, and then we'll see how much time we have to go through the other stuff. Maybe before we actually share the questions, it might make sense to say this. Before you go into any sales encounter, you might want to give a little thought to what you want the outcome to be. Right? Well, what do you want to happen as a result of this interaction, right? And Neil Rackham coined a phrase called an advance. And what he learned in his, Neil Rackham, by the way, if you don't know who he is, he's from the UK, and he is really the patron saint of scientific selling. He conducted the largest face-to-face sales study ever conducted, involved over 35,000 face-to-face sales interactions. We learned a lot of stuff about selling. But one of the things that he learned is that 9 out of 10 sales interactions don't end with a win or lose. That's actually not what happens. What happens in 9 out of 10 sales interactions is we either get what he called an advance, where the sale moves forward in a little way, okay, so some progress is made, or what he called a continuation. And a continuation is a situation where the sale's not dead, but it didn't go anywhere either. So it's just kind of stagnant and sitting there. And I know a lot of sales professionals have a pipeline that's full of these deals that are in continuation mode, right? So anyway, that's what he learned. That's what happens. So when I say that it's 95% effective, what I mean is you're going to get an advance where our sale moves forward in a little way, or you'll actually close it. Okay. And so with that backdrop, what we want to have before we go into any meeting is we want to have an ideal advance. What's the best possible outcome we could achieve? And then we want to have a couple of backup plans, right? A couple of options, just in case our ideal advance proves unrealistic for some reason. And with that, you are ready to execute the perfect close. Okay. So basically the first question is going to be some variation of, does it make sense for us to X? Okay, I'll say it again for your audience. Does it make sense for us to X, where X is your ideal advance? Okay, so let's just imagine that I'm doing consulting for you and I'm going to do an assessment. I might say, does it make sense for us to schedule an assessment for you to see what our best options are? Okay, in that example, the assessment is the X, right? Now, if you think about it, there's only 2 things you can say. You're going to say yes, right? Or you're going to say no. If you say yes, awesome, right? We just got our advance and we only had to ask one of the 2 questions. Okay. If you say no, then the kindergarten version is just to throw the ball back to the customer and just ask them, say, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step then? Okay, or some variation of that. And what I can tell you is that, and it sounds so simple, but what will happen is 90% of the time the customer will offer a very logical next step for where they're at in their buying process. It's when we start to push them faster than they're ready for, that's when it starts to feel like manipulation to them. But doing it this way with these 2 questions, it's completely facilitative, it's non-confrontational, and that you haven't really asked them to commit to anything. And that's a very subtle difference, okay? So when people first learn it, they're worried about, well, what if the person says no? Okay, that's what they're worried about, right? I can tell you. And so think about this for a second, though. What have they really said no to? Did they say, no, I'm not going to take your course of action? Because we didn't ask them to take a course of action. Did they say, no, I will not, I'm not going to buy your thing? No, because we didn't ask them to buy anything. All we asked is, did it make sense? And so at its root, the perfect close is actually a timing question, okay? So if it makes you feel more comfortable, you could say, hey, is the timing right for us to X? And that'll work exactly the same way. So if you like that better, go ahead and use that, right?
I love it.
The point is, go ahead.
Before we get to that, James, so you talked about going back a bit, mentioning Neil Rackham and mentioning advances at each stage. So before we talk about just closing deals, is this something we can perhaps use earlier on in our sales process? So perhaps when we're having initial conversations, be that discovery calls, we've just generated an appointment. So rather than actually using this right at the end of the sales process where we think the deal's nearly over the line and we're saying, does it make sense to move ahead, move forward, sign the contract, whatever our end result is, if we're having an early stage call, can we use it as in, does it make sense to book our second call with the rest of your team? Perhaps you're speaking to a marketing exec and you need to get the marketing director, the sales manager, and whoever else is involved in the project. Does it make sense to book our next call on this date with the rest of the team?
You nailed it. That's exactly it. So think about it. So in chapter 8 of the book, we actually do a little bit of a brainstorm because every sale is a little different. And so there's a lot of little steps on the way to the big step, right? To the big final one. And so what we do in that session is, for your type of sale, we work out, hey, what are all the little baby steps? And then before you go to have your meeting, you can just look at this list of things that you've already brainstormed, and you can say, all right, I think that's logical, and this is logical, and this is probably the best thing that could happen. And those are going to be the three that you've got prepared, so that you can use your ideal advance, and then you'll use one of the other alternatives in the fallback, which we can share with your audience in a second if you want. There's another trick. I haven't shared this one anyway, but it's called an agenda close. And so in the discovery process, if you want, you can ask the customer, you can say, well, tell me, what are the steps you're going to go through to evaluate this solution? Right? How are you going to do it? And then they'll tell you all the steps that they're going to make. And then you, as a professional, pay attention, because they might be missing a couple of important steps. Like they might not have thought to check references, or they might not have thought to go on a site visit or something. And so you can say, oh, well, I noticed is this all something you wanted to do? Did you want to check references before you actually make your final decision? And so you can sort of coach them a little bit on how to add their steps. But once they agree to that, you have essentially got all of your advances specific to this one customer on a list. And then all you're doing after that, and it's not even your list, it's their list, then you're just going to facilitate their walking through each of those steps. And that tells you the advances that you're going to help them. You're just basically walking them through their own buying process.
I really like that. They're literally giving you what they need to see, almost a checklist of what they need on their end to get the deal done. And then if you hear things on your end that typically your clients ask for, so like you said, whether that's case studies, whether that's testimonials, whether that's other people to speak to, whether that's maybe learning a bit more about your process, what onboarding looks like, what an ongoing relationship looks like, you can say, usually our clients want to know this. And they might say, that'd be great.
Yeah, and they'll insert it into their process, and then boom, all you're doing is helping them through next steps in this process that they've created. So it will never feel like pressure to them, because what you'll feel like is a project manager actually to them.
Love it. Okay. So we mentioned advances. We talked about, you mentioned, James, an ideal advance, and then some of the backup advances. So is that, like you said, just putting it back on them, saying what does make sense as a next step? Or do we compile a list of secondary outcomes, third outcomes, etc.?
Yeah, so it's really simple, actually. So you've got your ideal thing that you hope has happened, but in case that doesn't happen, you think, okay, well, maybe there's a couple other steps that might be halfway steps. Okay,
right.
And what you can use is some other variations of the perfect close. So an upgrade to the kindergarten version that I just gave you is called a suggestion, and you actually just use it. You'd say, other clients at this stage tend to do X. Does it make sense for us to do X? Okay, and that's really important, especially if the thing that you sell is not something that people buy a lot. Because they might buy, I work in healthcare IT, and sometimes the thing that we're selling, they might buy once in a lifetime, right? And so they really don't have a good idea what next steps are. So when I'm saying, hey, does other clients at this stage tend to do this, does it make sense for us to do that? I'm facilitating, I'm helping them understand what logical next steps are appropriate, but I'm still leaving it up to them, right? It's still open. And you can also use that suggestion in the fallback. So if I said, hey, does it make sense for us to schedule an assessment? And then you say no, then I would say, well, other clients at this stage will sometimes do this other thing. Does it make sense for us to do that? And that's how you use the fallbacks that you prepared. And that is what ensures that every time we have a meeting, that we're getting progress each time, or it's actually closing.
Okay, so some of this actually comes down to not just what you asked, but preparation, pre-meeting. So understanding.
You nailed it. If there's a secret to selling, it's probably in the preparation.
Got it, man. Okay, so this technique, James, you've claimed it's 95% effective. Why is it? And like you say, I completely agree that so many of the closes, traditional closes that you hear, typical salespeople say at the end of a conversation, are just, we're wary of them when they're saying, like, should we get started? Should I send over the paperwork? The standard stuff we're used to hearing them. Why does this work? Why is it not manipulative like perhaps some of the closing techniques we used to?
Sure. Well, the root of it is that the question itself is not an actual commitment question, right? If I say, will you buy my stuff? Okay, I'm asking you a yes or no, a positive or negative feeling and question. And if you say no to that, man, our emotion level will tank. Okay, both with you and the customer. But when I say, does it make sense for us to do this? Or if I say, is the timing right for us to do this? Well, you haven't really asked for any commitment at all. Okay, but they can clearly see the direction you're headed, right? That's the beauty of it. But you haven't actually asked for the commitment yet. And so it feels, regardless of their answer, you're going to be emotionally on much, much higher ground, because all you're really doing is facilitating, but you're asking their permission if this particular step is now appropriate for this time. And because of that, it ends up not having all the negative baggage with a direct close, and it will keep you what people will actually see you as a trusted advisor, actually, because you're really just facilitating them through their own buying process.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it also gives the client or the potential customer the feeling that they're in control, I guess. So
Yeah, so there's another version of this. In fact, speaking of control, so there's another variation. The fallback, you can fall back multiple times. Like, let's just say, I said, hey, does it make sense for us to do X? You say no. I say, all right, other clients sometimes do this Y thing. Do you want to do that? If they say no to that, I could do it again. I could say, well, sometimes they do this third thing. Does it make sense for us to do that? And maybe this would be a good time to say, if I've given them two options, and then the final thing that you say in the fallback is you just throw them back that original question. Well, all right, well, what do you think is a good next step then? And usually, I've been on hundreds of ride-alongs. I can tell you, 90% of cases, they will actually suggest a logical next step for themselves, okay? But if it turns out that they still can't, after I've suggested three things and they still can't come up with anything, then that tells us something about the quality of the prospect. Now, and so we might want to put them in some kind of a passive marketing mode, but it's really not a good investment of our time as professionals, because, and so we kind of need that last 5% to help us understand how to manage our time, right? Well, there's another version called the add-on. And the way the add-on works is, if I say, hey, does it make sense for us to do X? And you say, yes, I go, great. Sometimes clients at this stage will also do Y. Does it make sense to do that? And so I'm adding on the other ones that I had in my list until I've reached the pace that the client's ready to go. Okay. And so if they say yes to that, I could say, well, sometimes they also do Z. Does it make sense to do that? And then at the end of the add-on, regardless of whether you run out of advances or whatever, you're going to ask the client something like this. You're going to say, well, are there any other logical steps we should be considering right now? Okay. And that, what that does is it gives the client a chance to share something that's logical to them that maybe you didn't even think about. Okay. And so again, they're in control, really, right? You're facilitating with questioning, but basically they're in control of what they want to do. And I will tell you a mind-blowing story. I was working with a group in Arizona, and we were demonstrating to their IT team, and we thought, these are not the decision makers. We want to do a presentation to their executive management team, because that's who we thought was going to make the decision. So I get in there, and we're all done. I say, all right, does it make sense for us to schedule a demo for your executive team so we can get their feedback and input? And he goes, yes, that's a great idea. I'm like, wow, cha-ching, I got my first advance, right? So I look at my list. I say, well, a lot of clients at this stage will have us get our technical people together to talk about the conversion. Does it make sense for us to schedule time for our tech people to talk? He's like, yes, my guys are really worried about that. So I'm like, wow, cha-ching, 2 for 2, right? So I asked him a thing. I said, I think I've got everything I need here to create a preliminary proposal for you, just so you can feel for the scope of the project. Yeah. Does that make sense for me to put together a preliminary proposal? He goes, yes, that'd be super helpful. I'm like, wow, I'm totally spent, right? So I asked him that last question. I just say, hey, well, are there any other logical steps we should be considering? And what this guy said will blow your mind. He looks around and kind of lowers his voice a little bit. He goes, well, is there any chance I could get a copy of your standard agreement? Because our legal people can be kind of slow. And I'm, of course, on the outside, I'm cool as a cucumber. I'm like, well, yes, I'd be happy to get you a copy of the standing. But on the inside, I'm like, oh yeah, are you kidding? Of course I can get you a contract, right? And here's the thing: is we didn't even think we were presenting to the right people, but because we used this method, we were able to pace it at exactly the rate that the client's ready to go, and that's what made it work, right? So with the fallback, you can slow it down, and with the add-on, you can speed it up at whatever pace the client's ready to go. That's the whole point, right? It's when we try to go faster than they're ready for, that's when it starts to feel like manipulation. And you don't want to go there, because as soon as the client feels manipulated, they will withhold information from you. And then the whole selling process is going to become, it will be dysfunctional, basically, because they don't trust you anymore, right? They're worried that you're trying to pressure them, and any information that you give them is going to be used against them.
I think, and James, correct me if I'm wrong here, but does it work so well also because it's conversational?
Absolutely. So, and you don't have to memorize anything. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about the timing of it either, because it is a timing question, right? So you don't have to, oh Lord, it's the right moment for me to ask the closing question? I mean, I can't tell by the sweat running off their head if this is the right thing to ask, right? I mean, I've read all these setups and things like that. And it's really, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You don't have to worry about it. All I would just say is, maybe from an agenda perspective, if you created an agenda for your meeting, I would just put action items or next steps somewhere at the bottom. And then what that will do is create a very natural flow as you go through your agenda to ask your, does it make sense question towards the end, because you're just following the normal agenda. So if you have a hard time knowing when, I would just create an agenda before you go. They don't have to be complicated. They can be half a page, right? And then you're just walking them through the list, and then you ask your question when it comes time to the next steps.
Yeah, so many good points raised there, James. The first one being able to qualify out prospects. So when you're actually asking them, like, does it make sense to move ahead, or does it make sense to involve other decision makers in the process? And if they can't, even when you flip that back to them, so say they're saying no to you in terms of your close, and then you're saying what does make sense as the next step, or what do you recommend as the next step, and they're not really giving you answers, or they're unsure and they're giving you wishy-washy responses. I guess it's quite a good way to filter out how serious they are about actually doing business with you, and then move on to the next qualified prospect, right?
Yeah, and so it kind of ties to the thing we said at the very beginning, which is the single best thing you can do is sell to only ideal clients. But in the real world, we don't always get that right. And so judging how they respond to these very facilitative, non-confrontational questions tells us about the quality and the urgency that this client has. And if they're not really willing to exercise any action or energy towards what we're talking about right now, then it must not be very important for them. And that tells us that it's going to be a time sink. From a sales, and as sales professionals, all we have is our time. That's it. We convert time into money, right? And so the Pareto principle says that 20% of those accounts you're going to work are actually going to suck up 80% of your time. So it's really important that the 20% you're working are really good and high qualified prospects. And this is one way of figuring that out. And you might even be able to do that on your discovery call where you haven't gone on site, you haven't invested a lot of time yet.
Gotcha. And is there ever a time where we can use it too much? As in, can we keep saying it and then eventually a prospect might clock onto it? Have we got to be strategic in how we place it into our conversations?
There's only one time where I'd say that's true, and that's in the fallback. So if you say, hey, does it make sense for us to do A, and they say no, and then you fall back to say, hey, does it make, all right, well, other clients at this stage sometimes do B, does it make sense for us to do that? And you can fall back even to C, right? Don't do it more than twice. My observation is that once you've done it more than twice, it starts to look really self-serving, like you're trying to push, right? And so just that would be the only time. I would say otherwise, what the data shows from gong.io is that you really can't use it too much. I mean, there are different variations. So I want people should make it natural and say it the way they say things. But be sure you understand what the question is. It's a timing question. It's not a commitment question. So when you're rephrasing it, don't accidentally do what one of my sales guys did and basically reworded it, and the way he reworded it turned it into a commitment question and said, will you do this, is essentially what he did. And what he thought he was doing, he thought he was compressing two questions into one really efficient question. But what he did is he changed the total nature of the question. He removed the timing aspect out of it, which ruined it.
Yeah, and I can genuinely vouch for the close myself, because I started using it when as I mentioned pre-record, I heard you on a podcast a while back, James, and I've actually started using it myself. So if I'm trying to book a meeting or try and book a next step, I'm typically saying, look, does it make sense to speak again this time next week, or does it make sense to involve the rest of the team? And so far, I haven't really had any pushback, or even if they say, just like you mentioned, even if they say, well, that's not going to be a great time for us, and I'm saying, well, when does make sense? And honestly, I've not had a pushback, as in someone's caught me out or someone's said, why are you asking me this? There's been no real rebuttal. It just does seem to work as a smooth process so far. I mean, I'll keep you in the loop if anyone does push back.
And I have a whole email directory full of it works. Oh my gosh, this works, right? They can't believe how simple it is. And you don't have to do any, prepping or memorizing crazy, things to set up your close. It's just a very simple thing that you can apply over and over again in all of the different models or different sales opportunities that you have. And so your experience is my experience, is it works pretty much all the time. I mean, if it doesn't work, then it's telling us something about the quality. Now, where maybe we should talk is we should set our expectations. What people probably hope for when they see a thing that says perfect close is that I can use this magic phrase to take a unqualified prospect and suddenly turn them into a closed qualified prospect, and that won't happen. Okay, sure. If I give you a terrible prospect and you use the perfect close on them, it doesn't matter. If they're a bad prospect and this is not a good solution for them, it's not going to magically convert them. So don't expect that. But what it will do is if you have good qualified prospects, that we talked about at the beginning, you'll end up with a huge pipeline that is all moving slowly forward at their own pace until you end up getting a lot of business, and you'll be closing. It's the industry average for close ratios is between 20 and 22% or so, right? So, but I have many clients that have salespeople that are closing 80% of their clients, right? Now their sales cycles vary because it just depends on what you're selling and what the normal process is. But can you imagine closing at 80% everything that you're working? What would that do to your income? I mean, if you're around the 20% level and you're closing at 80, that's like 4xing your income, and it can do that. I've actually had one client where it 9x'd their income. So it's all very doable, but your expectations of, hey, there's a magic thing I can say that will make them buy my stuff right now, that's not what this is.
Yeah, and I completely agree. At the end of the day, if you're going to put rubbish, if you're going to put nonsense into your sales funnel of prospects that aren't that qualified, that aren't a great fit, then you can't expect awesome, insane, magical results or 10x of your sales revenue. It's just not going to happen, right? Yeah. But these small things, I think even the fact that this can qualify prospects pretty fast, and quite often when you do ask for those next commitment levels, you're soon going to shake out any weeds in the pipeline. You're soon going to determine if this is a genuine prospect who genuinely wants your help or has a problem you can solve, or if it's just someone trying their luck. So yeah, I mean, that's all good. In terms of the things that we've covered, James, in terms of ideal advances, backup advances, why it works, is there any other points that we should take in consideration before we go out, hit the phones or hit the Zoom calls and try and start working this into our general approach?
Yeah, so I would just say this is, selling is serving, okay? And so a lot of people have the wrong perception about what it is. They think it's about persuasion, or they think it's about manipulation or something, but selling is really about serving. And if you think about it, the reason the customer's talking to you is because they're trying to achieve a goal, but they can't do it on their own. So they're expecting you to be a coach and a facilitator to help them get their goal. That's what your job is, right? So it's really more about leadership than it is about persuasion. And which one of us, right? It's at the beginning of the year. A lot of people have fitness goals this time of year. Which one of us wouldn't like to have a coach that would help us move at our own pace to help us achieve our own fitness goal? Well, we all would, right? Well, that's what the customer's expecting from you. So that's my challenge to the sales professional out there in the world, is that we can really do a lot better job of facilitating, about teaching, about coaching our clients and helping them achieve their goals. And when you do that, oh my goodness, life becomes so much easier. The first thing is that it's actually way more successful. So you're going to actually sell more by just helping them get what they're trying to get, right? Don't lean into it. Don't think about you, think about them. And then, and secondly, you'll be so much more happy. The process of selling this way is it puts you in this Zen-like state where you're just enjoying every minute of it. And so if you're feeling any kind of pressure or anything like that I got to get this closed because I got to make quota or whatever, all of that will disappear and your success level will go through the roof. So it's this beautiful sweet spot between those two things where you're actually genuinely helping customers and you're actually more successful yourself, and the whole process is enjoyable for you, and it's just the best place you can be. And so just upgrading your closing process just to this simple thing, it's very liberating for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and I've been there, James. I've been in the boiler room. I've been selling products over the phone, ramming them down people's throats in years gone by, where it's just, you did it, but I just didn't feel great. That's why I had to get out of it. That's why I got into digital marketing sales, something I'm more passionate, what I generally enjoy, and where I can really help people and grow their business. And I've been there where you've kind of selling things that you're just going for the close rather than trying to offer a product or service that's genuinely helpful. And like you say, when you start using these kind of strategies that are actually putting the customer in control, and it's almost as if the customer's making the decision themselves. So rather than trying to force them, push them to do it, that you're actually asking them, look, does it actually make sense to do this? And they feel like they have full control, I feel.
Yes, and it's better. They want that. So there's we could talk more about the science about why it works, but the thing is when you're working with a customer in the first few minutes, they are judging two things. They're judging warmth and competence. Okay, and warmth is basically they're looking for your intent. And what they do in the first few seconds, literally, is they look at it, they say, what is this person's intention? Is this person trying to help me or hurt me? Okay. And then the second thing they gauge is what's their competence. How capable are they at helping me or hurting me? And the mistake that most salespeople make, really a large share of them, is they think if they can win the competence battle, I am the best at doing this. They think if they can win that battle, they will win. But the truth is, what the data shows, hands down, is that warmth and intent is measured heavier and earlier in the process than competency. And so they're playing to the competency, which is fine. You need to be competent for sure, right? You still want to be the best, but they need to understand that your intention is to help them in whatever way is appropriate. And if they detect at some point that your intentions are off, then in most cases the show's off, right? That's when they start withholding information, and that's when the sales process starts becoming dysfunctional. So intent in this case matters more than technique does, because it's that person's trust in us that allows us to demonstrate our competence. So I mean, that's a little more science behind why the whole thing works.
That could of course be a whole other episode, but just to put across that intent, is that more in the way of the tone of our voice, our hand movements, how we're coming across to prospects, or is
there is a ton of things? That is a really great question. So all of chapter 3 is designed around that in the book. But I will just say you've got something called micro expressions, and these are facial expressions that actually are 1/25th of a second or so. They're super fast. Most people cannot detect them and discern them, and so people just when they react with a person, they say, "Oh, I have this feeling about this person." But what's really happening is they're reacting to these micro expressions. So that's a nonverbal way that people communicate. There's another thing that's called mirror neurons, and that's a short version, without giving you a whole science thing on that, is it's sympathy. It's why when you go to a movie and you can relate to the characters in the movie and you cry because the person in the show is sad, right? That's mirror neurons working. And that's a very fascinating area of science. That's nonverbal communication between two people. And the last is called paralanguage. And paralanguage is the tonality in your voice. They could, like, if your significant other, if you ask her how she's doing and she says fine, you can tell by the way they said fine that they're really not fine, right?
Yep.
So yeah, exactly. So these 3 things are 3 areas where we're communicating our intent unintentionally. Okay. And so when you first share this with sales professionals, the immediate thing that they go for is they go, well, how do I make sure that I'm communicating, the right intent? And I'm like, you can't. That's the answer. The answer is you can't. The only real answer, and there's something sublimely divine about what I'm about to share with you, is that the only way to really demonstrate that you have good intent is to actually have good intent. Okay. And so there's a couple things you can do before you go into any meeting to think about, hey, get off yourself, get off your product, and just think, how can I best serve this person? If you go in with that kind of an attitude, what will happen is all of these nonverbal signals that you're giving off will all be sending the right signal, and that person will recognize that you're actually just trying to help. But when you go in thinking about how you can get their money, well, I'll give you an example. I had a customer call me one time and said, don't send that sales guy back here again. So he got mad at one of my sales guys, and he goes, that guy has commission breath. Okay. And that word just captures exactly what we're talking about. Is he could tell that my sales guy was not interested in helping him genuinely. He was just trying to get money. He was just trying to get a sale. Right. And so the guy said, hey, don't ever bring him back here again. I don't want to see that guy. And so that's the point I was trying to make, is that your intent matters more than technique does. And so maybe another great principle here is that becoming a better person will actually make you a better salesperson. And that's because of how important trust is in the sale, right? Other kind of industries, if you're a brain surgeon, maybe, competency is really more important than your bedside manner. But when it comes to selling, our trust is far, far more important because it's rated above the competency.
Yeah, love that. Completely agree. In your opinion, James, you mentioned that being genuine, rather than just having the commission breath, pushing for a deal just because you want the commission check or you want to hit a certain target. Do you feel that as a business owner or as a sales professional, we have to be genuinely passionate about how our product helps people, the product itself, or the product's outcomes? Otherwise, we're not going to be able to hit our full potential?
100%. And I would actually put most of that focus on the outcomes that the client receives by using the product. Your product is only a vehicle to help them get the result that they're doing, right, that they're aiming for. And so that's where our focus should be. And so instead of thinking about your product and all the features and all the bells and whistles and all that, like it's super common in the SaaS industry, right, to go straight to the demo. Okay. But how will you know what the target is that you're supposed to hit in the demo if you haven't learned in discovery what the customer's goals are? Right. And so it's really important for us to step back and just listen and try to understand what the customer's trying to do. And once you've done that, then you'll know exactly what the bullseye is. And you'll find that you actually could do your normal demo in half the time or less, because they're only really trying to do a couple of really, simple things. And you don't need to show them everything. In fact, when you show them more of what your software, your solution does than the customer asked for, it actually, in their brains, it makes it look more complex to them than it needs to be. So you're hurting yourself when you go past the actual measure of what they're trying to do, right? Just solve exactly what they're trying to solve, and then stop. And if they want to give you more, they will give you more. But if you oversell it, what ends up happening is your solution starts to look complex. And they're like, oh, wow, and this is going to require a lot of change and a lot of learning, and I don't know if I want that, right? And so the only way to solve that problem is just to listen during the discovery process and understand exactly what they're going for. And there is an art to that. Like, we could spend a whole nother session on how do I conduct a discovery that allows me to identify what those two key issues are. Because in most cases, there's only two really weighty key issues. They might give you 6, right? But there's going to be 2 of those that are carrying all the weight. And so you need to know what those are before you start saying, oh, I can do that. I can do that. Because if you ask them, the 6th one that they give you might be the one that's carrying all the weight. And so you have to be really smart about how you conduct your discovery, and don't jump into selling before you understand what the bullseye is.
Yeah, completely agree. Listening is definitely a skill that's hugely undervalued. And I can say for sure, I used to be terrible at it, especially in my younger days of sales and business. I used to want to rush through my offer, quickly tell my prospects how great, how amazing my product, how amazing my service was. When really you need to, like you say, conduct good discovery, understand where they're trying to get to, what their issues are, if your product's even a good match or a good fit to help them out before you get to that good stuff, whether it's a demonstration, proposal, whatever that next step may be. Look, James, really enjoyed this, man. One final question, if I may, for anyone that's whizzed through this full podcast episode and thought, yes, this all sounds really good, this all sounds great, but I still don't really like asking people to do stuff. What would your advice be for them, James, for people that don't really like asking for the close?
You're in sales. Part of your job is to ask people to do. So I would just say this: understand that selling is serving. If you look at what sales call reluctance is, it can be traced down to about 4 or 5 different things. But probably one of the biggest things is that you may not be emotionally and from your value side congruent with what you're selling. And if you do not believe in your product, that it's actually helping and serving other people when they get the full benefit of it, then you need to get away and get into an industry where you can believe in the product, because you are telegraphing all of that nonverbal non-trust in your own solution when you're in your conversations with clients. You'll be telegraphing it. And so just make sure that the thing that you are selling is something you can be passionate about. Maybe you own that same thing, or maybe you've used it and you've seen the results. And if you're a manager listening to this, here's what my advice is. Have a day where you're having a sales meeting, and then have one of your happy customers come in and just explain to your team exactly why it is that they love the solution, and explain how they use it and how it made a difference in them. That will make, you could literally, as the manager, you could do that same presentation yourself, but your team will not believe it in the same way as when you bring a client in and they speak right from their heart about how it does that. That will change their understanding of how it really does make a difference. But that is a fundamental thing, is if you don't believe in the product, you're going to be telegraphing it all over the place. So it's really important for us and all of our teams to make sure that we're 100% sold on the solution. And if you're not, go pick an industry where you can be passionate about the solution, right? Where you know that when a customer adopts it, it makes a difference in people's lives, because that matters, right? And so when you understand that, I'm in the healthcare space, and what I can tell you is that is we end up in situations all the time where some kind of miracle, a drug or a technique or a procedure is discovered, and it helps save someone's life. Well, but what most people don't realize is that there's sales involved in all of those. There's a selling part of it, because those procedures require, all kinds of things that cost money that insurance companies have to pay for, and they have to get on schedules and things like that. And so selling it takes place. But is anybody sad that a salesperson was involved that developed a biodegradable tracheal splint that saved somebody's life? Well, no, we're grateful that sale happened, because lives were saved because of that. Okay. Well, just think about what you're selling is the same way, right? You're helping a person achieve a goal, avert a problem, or get away from a crisis of some kind. One of those 3 things. And so not only should you not experience any reticence or resistance, it actually should be inherently motivating on its own. In the same way that you would love to help somebody across the street if they're struggling to get across the street, that you would do that, right? In the same way you're trying to help a customer actually achieve their goal, you're serving them. And these medical examples that I'm talking about, they reveal what selling really is, which is serving. Right? It's when we get too far apart from that, we start to think about what we want, what we're going to get out of it, or the money that we're going to get. And that's when it becomes dysfunctional. And I'll acknowledge, by the way, that it is hard sometimes. But when you remember that selling is serving is 100% noble and it is 100% satisfying when we do that. And that is motivating in its own right.
James, love all of those examples and love the passion that shines through yourself when you're selling it to me. And just like you say, being genuine about what you offer. I love the example of getting in a happy customer so they can literally tell you why they like your product, why they like your service. They can even give you some of the content that you can use yourself. You can literally take the words out of your mouth, out of their mouths, which we've talked about on previous episodes in terms of being able to use that in your marketing material and in your sales pitch, on your website, on all your collateral. So yeah, I've just thoroughly enjoyed it, James. I really want to thank you for coming on, and we'll definitely have to get you back in on a future episode if you're up for it, sir.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It was great being on. I thank you for inviting me.
Cheers, dude. And if anyone out wants to learn more about yourself, if anyone wants to connect with you or do some business with you, James, what is the best way to get in touch, please?
Sure. The website is definitely the best. It's puremuir.com, puremuir.com. And it actually, literally everything that we've talked about. I used to have this huge page that had like about a dozen or 16 different downloads. They're all now in one big super bundle. So if somebody wants to literally download pretty much all the content that we've talked about today, they can get all of that for free just off the website. Just go to the resources page. Poof, there's a download. You get one big file that has all this stuff in it.
Awesome, man. Good stuff, James. Well, thank you once again, and we'll catch you again soon. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit subscribe wherever the heck you get your podcast. It's Business Growth Show. And with that, we'll catch you again on the next episode.